Imagine a bustling city street, sunlight glinting off polished cars, and a tense standoff unfolding on the sidewalk. A young black teen, trembling with confusion and anger, has just been pulled over for no clear reason. The officer's gaze is cold, and the fear in the boy's eyes is unmistakable. Bystanders start to film with their phones, outrage simmering in the thick summer heat. Then in a moment that will forever etch itself into everyone's memory, a presidential motorcade appears, its lead vehicle rolling to a stop, the door swinging open. Out steps a woman whose power and status will bring karma crashing down on the racist cop. Jamal Harris lived in one of the busiest neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. The pulse of the city made his heart soar every morning when he walked to school. At 17, he was tall and lanky, always carrying a battered blue backpack filled with textbooks that seemed far too thick to be for a junior in high school. Still, he liked to study. There was something about burying his nose in a good book, letting the words on the pages help him forget the everyday struggles of being a black teen in a city teeming with social tensions. His mother, Morgan Harris, was the rock of his life. Not only was she a devoted single parent, but she was also a respected speechwriter and policy advisor at the White House, serving directly under the President of the United States. She rarely made a public spectacle of her position. Morgan wasn't the type to brag about her successes. In fact, she kept her affiliation low profile for Jamal's sake. She didn't want him to be treated differently by his classmates or teachers. Jamal's day-to-day life was normal, filled with typical teenage drama basketball practice and advanced placement classes. But D.C. had become a tense place. The news had carried numerous stories of wrongful stops, questionable policing, and protests. The lines were drawn between communities that felt threatened and police officers who felt their authority slipping beneath endless scrutiny. Though Morgan assured her son never to jump to the worst conclusion, she also taught him how to protect himself if he ever found himself stopped by an officer. Keep hands visible. Speak calmly. Request a reason for the stop. Above all, remain respectful and safe. That day began like any other. Jamal left the modest apartment he shared with his mom, waving goodbye to her as she hurried into a black SUV with tinted windows heading for the White House. Jamal watched the vehicle disappear around the corner, feeling a twinge of pride. Not everyone's mom got escorted to work by Secret Service agents, but for Morgan it was just part of the job. Jamal slung his backpack over his shoulder and started walking to school. The city was alive around him. Food trucks lining the curb, joggers weaving through foot traffic, and important-looking government employees rushing to offices near Capitol Hill. Jamal walked with his headphones in, letting the bass of his favorite hip-hop playlist guide his pace. He felt good today. His last test scores had been stellar, and he was already thinking about college applications. He had no idea that by evening, his entire perspective on the city and on justice would change. As he passed a local bakery, he noticed a group of uniformed police officers standing outside their patrol cars, sipping coffee. He recognized some from the local precinct. He saw them often as they patrolled near the National Mall. They didn't greet him, and he didn't greet them, though one set of eyes followed him as he made his way down the sidewalk. The look he received was cold, lingering, and definitely not friendly. Jamal shook it off, swallowing the creeping sense of unease. He checked the time on his phone. He had 15 minutes to get to homeroom. Adjusting the shoulder straps on his backpack, he quickened his steps. He tried to bury that uncomfortable moment under thoughts of the new biology lab he was excited for and the upcoming basketball tryouts. Unfortunately, That tension in the air wasn't so easy to shake. Little did he know Officer Philip Tennyson, the same man who had just studied him with such a suspicious eye, would appear in Jamal's path later that day in a way that would alter the course of both their lives. Chapter 2. Glimpses of the White House. Morgan Harris's day started with a strategic briefing in the West Wing. She walked through the halls, her low heels clicking on the polished floors. Though there was a swirl of important conversations around her, immigration reform, economic policy, education, initiatives, her mind was partly on Jamal. Mothers never truly turned off their protective instincts, especially in a city that felt more volatile by the day. Morgan had grown up in a humble neighborhood in Detroit, the daughter of working-class parents who ingrained in her the values of hard work and compassion. She wasn't one to take her high-profile career for granted. Every success felt like an earned victory. That morning, she reviewed a speech draft with the President's Chief of Staff, aware that the words she chose would eventually reach millions. Yet an undercurrent of worry tugged at her heart. Over the last few months, she had heard too many stories of young black men being stopped in the street sometimes for valid reasons, too often for none. Still, she didn't let the fear paralyze her. She trusted Jamal. He was a sensible kid, cautious when necessary, but never paranoid. If he encountered any trouble, she knew he'd handle it well. And if the worst happened, well, she was prepared to move mountains to protect him. The morning passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and drafting sessions. By lunchtime, Morgan's schedule showed back-to-back appointments. The President was set to have a late afternoon meeting with international delegates, and Morgan needed to finalize some bullet points. As she sat at her desk, scribbling her thoughts on a notepad, a text message from Jamal's teacher popped up. Jamal was late to first period, but he's here safe and sound. Just letting you know. Don't worry, he's doing great in class. She allowed herself a relieved grin. Jamal being late was uncharacteristic, but at least he was in class. After sending a quick thank you message back, Morgan turned her focus to her job. Each carefully chosen phrase needed to reflect the administration's stance clearly. She was good at this precision, with words was her forte. Still, a quiet voice in the back of her mind whispered that there was more to do than shaping policy. There were hearts to change laws, to amend mindsets, to break down. Her work was often overshadowed by bureaucracy. But Morgan believed that real social change, while sometimes sofu, was possible. She had seen glimpses of it in her time on Capitol Hill. Empathy could be cultivated even among lifelong cynics. She was determined to make a difference for people like Jamal, people who deserved to grow up safe and unafraid. After wrapping up some calls, Morgan left the White House briefly to address a quick personal errand. She was to join a presidential motorcade later that evening for a short trip across town to an awards ceremony. Since she'd be spending most of the night with high-level officials, she wanted to pick up a surprise gift for Jamal. Maybe something for his upcoming 18th birthday. Walking out the gates, she spotted a shining black limousine, often referred to informally as the Beast, the heavily armored presidential car, a real staple of White House transportation. It gleamed under the early afternoon sun, flanked by Secret Service SUVs. A moment of pride surged through her as she reflected on how far she'd come. Then she slipped into a more discreet sedan that was waiting for her. The motorcade with the Beast would follow later in the day, after the President finished his own appointments. Morgan had no idea that soon she'd be calling for that very limo in a moment of crisis, a moment where her son's life would hang in the balance of a racist cop's judgment. By early afternoon, Jamal was thrilled about one thing: he had aced a pop quiz in AP Biology. Mrs. Riggs, his teacher, patted him on the shoulder and said, "Well done, Jamal, you're on a roll." Embarrassed, he just nodded, tucking away the achievement as a silent victory. He planned to text his mom later. Maybe they could go out for pizza to celebrate. On the surface, it was a regular day. He joked with classmates about the upcoming school dance, teased a friend about his new basketball shoes, and rummaged through the cafeteria for the least soggy fries. But tension simmered underneath the memory of that officer's stare still crawling up his spine. It was something intangible, that sense of being watched, of being judged without reason. When the final bell rang, Jamal decided to walk downtown. He had some time to kill before heading home, and he wanted to browse some second-hand bookstores. Often he'd find hidden gems, old volumes of historical biographies or science journals. Shoving his phone into his pocket, he made his way through the throngs of students pouring out onto the streets. It was a humid day. The air felt thick with the promise of rain. Jamal cut through a side street, passing by a quaint row of shops. He stopped in front of one particularly old building, its display window cluttered with yellow-paged books and antiques. As he browsed inside, an old man behind the counter greeted him warmly. Jamal struck up a conversation, flipping through a worn copy of W.E.B. Du Bois's essays. The sense of calm inside the shop stood in sharp contrast to the busy city roads outside. Time slipped away faster than he realized. When he finally left the bookstore, dusk was gathering. The streetlights began flickering on. Jamal reached into his backpack for his phone. He spotted several texts from his mom. "Mom hoped school was good. Busy day here. Let me know when you're headed home." He shot back a quick reply. "On my way home, soon." He'd have to catch the bus or train if he didn't want to walk the long mile back. Checking his watch, he realized he might even have to hurry. He remembered that his mom had an important evening event and might not be home until much later. With one last look at the fading sky, Jamal turned onto a main road, hoping to find a bus stop. Cars zipped past headlights, slicing through the dim light. Up ahead, he spotted a convenience store and decided to grab a bottle of water. The route was mostly safe, plenty of foot traffic. But like many major cities, DC was no stranger to petty crime. He kept his backpack, zipped headphones off ears alert. As he stepped out of the store, water in hand, the unexpected happened. A patrol car slowly cruised around the corner and pulled to the curb behind him. Two uniformed officers sat inside. The driver was the same man, from that morning, Officer Philip Tennyson. His partner, Officer Karen Price, sat in the passenger seat, wearing a tense expression. Jamal's heart began to race. A voice in his head echoed his mother's advice. "Stay calm. Keep your hands visible. Do not run." He took a breath and started walking slowly along the sidewalk, determined not to give them any excuse. Then the lights on the patrol car burst into a swirl of red and blue. The siren chirped once, and Officer Tennyson's amplified voice boomed. "Hey, you stop right there." Jamal froze. All thoughts of continuing calmly on his way vanished. He felt a surge of panic, but he turned around. Slowly, arms raised slightly at his sides, water bottle dangling from his fingertips. People on the sidewalk paused. Some took out their phones. Others stared with uneasy curiosity. Jamal's mind ran through every scenario he'd read about or seen on the news. He was doing nothing wrong. He'd simply bought a bottle of water. Yet here he was, singled out with a police cruiser's lights blazing in the growing darkness. The tension was electric, a silent hum in the air that signaled trouble. He locked eyes with Officer Tennyson, whose gaze gleamed with a disturbing sort of triumph. As Tennyson stepped out of the car, the real trouble began. Officer Philip Tennyson had been on the force for nearly 2 decades. To some, he was a hard-working cop who didn't shy away from tough neighborhoods. To others, he was the embodiment of a problem, one that singled out minorities under the guise of suspicious behavior. If you asked Tennyson, he'd claim he was simply doing his job. But if you looked into his record, you'd see multiple complaints filed over allegations of racial profiling complaints that never quite stuck because of insufficient evidence or lack of follow-up. Now he had the perfect opportunity to indulge his biases. A young black teen alone at dusk, carrying a backpack, stepping out of a convenience store. In Tennyson's mind, it was enough to warrant a stop and question. No matter that the teen was calmly sipping from a water bottle, or that the teen had done nothing except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Hands where I can see them," Tennyson barked. Jamal raised both hands, water bottle still in one. He tried to speak calmly. "Officer, what's this about?" "I quiet," Tennyson growled. "You fit a description of a suspect in the area. Turn around up against the fence." Jamal's eyes widened. He glanced at the line of curious onlookers, some of whom were already filming. "Sir, I haven't done anything." Tennyson gestured with a jerk of his chin. "Against the fence." Slowly, Jamal did as he was told. His mind raced. The description part felt like a flimsy excuse. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, the same kind of outfit thousands of kids wore. It stung him to realize how easily Tennyson's words might escalate the situation. He also remembered his mother's instructions. Compliance might be his best shot at safety. Officer Karen Price stepped out of the cruiser as well. She appeared uneasy, glancing around at the bystanders who were filming. "Phil, maybe we should talk to him first," she said in a low voice, meant only for Tennyson. But Tennyson ignored her. His entire focus was on Jamal, who stood with his palms pressed to the cold metal bars of a fence. "Spread your feet," Tennyson commanded, stepping forward to pat Jamal down. The officer's search was rough, his hands slapping Jamal's pockets and rummaging through them without care. Jamal stood rigid, face burning with humiliation. A group of pedestrians edged closer, their phones capturing every second. Some began to murmur loudly, questioning the officer's actions. "There's nothing on him," Phil Officer Price said, stepping back. "We got no reason to hold him." She looked at the onlookers, clearly uncomfortable. "There's always a reason," Tennyson muttered. He leaned close to Jamal's ear. "You out here dealing, boy? Where are you hiding it?" Jamal's cheeks flamed. "I'm not dealing anything. I was just in the bookstore, then the store for water." He tried to stay composed, but indignation cracked his voice. Tennyson turned Jamal around, gripping his shoulder with a force that made Jamal wince. "We'll see about that. Let me see your ID." "I'm 17, Jamal said. "I don't." "Then you got a school ID." "Where is it?" Tennyson snapped. When Jamal hesitated, Tennyson raised his voice. "Get me that ID or I'll have to bring you in." Jamal fumbled for his wallet. His hands trembled as he pulled out a slightly bent student ID card. Tennyson snatched it, reading it with narrowed eyes. "Jamal Harris," he read. "Yeah, that's you." He shoved it back at Jamal, who barely managed to catch it. "There, you got my ID," Jamal said, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. "Could you tell me why I'm being stopped?" Tennyson sneered. Watch your tone. We got a report of a young man in a black t-shirt and jeans shoplifting nearby. You match that description." Jamal swallowed. He knew how vague that description was. "I haven't shoplifted anything. You can check my receipt for the water. I just bought it." "Receipt," Tennyson repeated in a mocking tone. "We'll check it, and I'll check with the store clerk." Officer Price exhaled in frustration. "Phil let me run inside and ask," she offered, stepping toward the convenience store. She seemed to be the only one seeking the truth in a direct manner. While she went into the store, Tennyson continued glaring at Jamal. The tension made Jamal's breathing shallow. His mind scrambled for how to de-escalate. He tried to remain polite. "Officer, I swear I didn't do anything." "My mom works." Tennyson's hand shot out, grabbing Jamal's arm. "Don't start with me about your mom. That's how you punks always try to weasel out of trouble." "Hey," someone in the crowd shouted. "This kid hasn't done anything." Another voice chimed in. "We're recording you, officer." Tennyson glared at the bystanders. "Back off, or you're obstructing justice," he snapped. But the cameras kept rolling phones, capturing every moment. Eventually, Officer Price emerged from the store. She shook her head at Tennyson. "No one stole anything there, Phil." The clerk recognized the kid. He said he just bought water and left. "No issues at all." Silence fell for a moment. Jamal's heart hammered. Tennyson's gaze flicked from his partner to Jamal, and anger flashed across his face. He was cornered, his supposed suspect, a law-abiding high school student. Yet his pride held him captive. He couldn't simply let Jamal go without some show of control. "Fine," Tennyson said curtly. "We'll verify with the station. Kid's probably up to something else. I've seen his type many times." Officer Price frowned. "Come on, Phil. We got no probable cause." But Tennyson was no longer listening. He tightened his grip on Jamal's arm. "We'll just take you down for some questioning, Harris. Let's go." Jamal's eyes widened in alarm. "No. That's not fair," he exclaimed, voice cracking. Fear overshadowed everything else. He could almost hear his mother's voice telling him to remain calm. But how could he stay calm when a racist cop was determined to drag him into the station for no reason? Suddenly, screeching tires grabbed everyone's attention. A black SUV skidded to a stop behind the squad car, sending a wave of relief through Jamal's veins. He recognized the license plate. This was one of the Secret Service vehicles that often escorted Morgan. The driver, Agent Dawson, jumped out, scanning the scene with sharp eyes. "Jamal, you okay?" Tennyson bristled at the newcomer's authoritative tone. "Who the hell are you?" Agent Dawson stepped forward, calmly flashing his credentials. "Secret Service. That young man is the son of Morgan Harris, Senior White House Advisor. Do we have a problem here?" "Officer." A hush fell over the crowd. Tennyson's scowl deepened. For the first time, uncertainty flickered behind his cold eyes. Jamal could hear the pounding of his own heart, relief and dread mixing into a whirlwind of emotions. He was safe for the moment, but he could also see Tennyson's fury mounting. The racist cop had singled him out, and now a Secret Service agent had arrived. It was the last thing Tennyson expected. The stage was set for a confrontation that would soon reverberate across the entire city. Word traveled fast. Within minutes, Morgan Harris received a distressed phone call. She was still in the middle of her duties at the White House, reviewing final notes for that evening's awards ceremony, when her personal phone buzzed. Seeing Agent Dawson's name, she answered with a sudden sense of dread. "Ma'am, Dawson said there's an incident with your son Jamal on 14th Street. I intervened because he's being wrongly detained by a local officer. The crowd is getting restless." Morgan felt her stomach twist into knots. "Is he safe? Is he hurt?" "He's physically okay for now, but the officer seems intent on taking him in anyway." "We need you here." Morgan's mind raced. She didn't even pause to think. "I'm on my way," she said. "Stay with him. Keep him safe." She dashed out of the building and found the Secret Service waiting with the partial motorcade. Plans changed in an instant when it was a matter of personal emergency involving a White House advisor's family. Morgan's colleagues offered help, but she only focused on one thing: her son's safety. It took less than 10 minutes for Morgan to get to the scene, though it felt like an eternity. During the ride, she gripped her phone so hard, her knuckles turned white, imagining all the stories of violent encounters she had read. "Please let him be safe. Please let me get there in time." She repeated this in her head like a mantra. As the vehicles sped through the streets, traffic lights turned green, thanks to prearranged signals. Morgan stared out the tinted window, scanning the sidewalks for any sign of Jamal. Then she saw the flashing red and blue lights, the crowd and the black SUV with Secret Service standing guard. Her heart pounded. She stepped out of the car with brisk determination. Cameras and phones pivoted in her direction. Bystanders parted to let her through, some of them gasping in recognition. She cut a formidable figure, tall, poised, and furious. Tennyson looked up, his jaw tightening when he realized who she might be. Morgan spotted Jamal, tears brimming in his eyes as he tried to remain composed. "Mum," he blurted, relief washing over his face. She rushed to him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder, eyes scanning him from head to toe for injuries. Then Morgan turned her attention to Tennyson, her voice resonating with unmistakable authority. "What is going on here?" Officer Tennyson squared his shoulders. "Ma'am, I'm in the middle of an investigation. Please stand aside." Morgan drew a breath, fighting to keep her temper controlled. "This is my son. I have been informed he's done nothing wrong. I'd like to know why you're detaining him." Tennyson opened his mouth, but before he could spew more allegations, Officer Price stepped in, clearly uneasy. "He was stopped because we believed he matched a suspect's description. The convenience store clerk confirmed it wasn't him. We found no cause to hold him." Tennyson glared at his partner, but didn't refute her words. The onlookers murmured, the tension shifting as they realized the woman in front of them was connected to the White House. Then, as if on cue, another set of black vehicles pulled up part of the official motorcade, carrying staffers who'd been with Morgan for the awards ceremony. And there it was, the presidential limo, often nicknamed the Beast, glinting under the streetlights. Even though the president himself wasn't present, seeing that iconic vehicle arrive cast a hush over the scene. The door opened, and more Secret Service agents stepped out, forming a protective ring around Morgan and Jamal. Pedestrians stared open-mouthed. A few recognized Morgan from media appearances and whispered excitedly. Phones continued rolling, capturing the surreal moment, a white police officer trying to arrest an innocent black teen, while a high-ranking White House official and an entire presidential motorcade intervened. Morgan crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on Tennyson. "Officer, we have a large crowd here. We have video evidence that there was no wrongdoing by my son. Are you still insisting on taking him in?" Tennyson set his jaw, his knuckles whitening around the baton in his hand. His pride was on the line, but the presence of the Secret Service and the mother's obvious authority left him cornered. "I was just doing my duty," he said defensively. Morgan's eyes flashed. "Your duty does not include harassing innocent teenagers. Let me assure you there will be consequences for this." She turned, placing a hand protectively on Jamal's shoulder, guiding him toward her waiting car. The crowd parted, many cheering, some chanting in support of Jamal. The tension was palpable, but for the moment the crisis receded. Tennyson stood there seething, watching as the mother and son climbed into the back of a secure vehicle. As the door closed, the last thing Jamal saw was the cluster of onlookers shouting at Tennyson phones still recording. Morgan's expression was stormy. This wasn't over. One racist encounter had set off a chain reaction, and somewhere in the back of Jamal's mind, a tremor of relief mingled with the knowledge that if he hadn't had such a well-connected mother, this nightmare might have ended very differently. The video footage quickly went viral. By the next morning, national news outlets were replaying the clip, an officer aggressively detaining a teenager, then the dramatic arrival of Morgan Harris in a presidential limo, the Beast. Headlines screamed about police misconduct and potential racial profiling. Commentators weighed in on the significance of a White House official's child facing such a situation. Protest groups seized the story to push for reforms. Meanwhile, behind closed doors at the local precinct, a storm was brewing. Officer Price had submitted a candid report stating that there was no probable cause. Her words, along with the videos from the scene, painted Tennyson in a damning light. The police chief, under pressure from city officials and the public, opened an internal investigation. Tennyson was placed on administrative leave pending review. Jamal found himself at the center of attention, something he neither asked for nor wanted. His phone buzzed relentlessly with messages of support from classmates, sympathy from teachers, and outraged comments from strangers who had seen the video. He felt overwhelmed, a swirl of relief that he'd escaped harm, anger at the injustice and confusion over the sudden spotlight. He wasn't used to being the subject of national debates. Morgan tried to shield him as best she could, but she was also juggling her high-profile job. The White House press secretary addressed the incident in a briefing calling for calm and a thorough investigation. The president himself made a short statement, emphasizing the need for accountability in all walks of public service. In private, Morgan met with administration lawyers to determine the best approach for ensuring justice for Jamal, while not allowing the issue to become just another political football. One thing was clear: Tennyson's actions would have consequences both legally and socially. Even among his colleagues, there were those tired of being associated with the same old bad apple argument that overshadowed the honest work of many officers. The city's mayor requested a meeting with Morgan and Jamal to offer a personal apology. Despite this flurry of official gestures, none of it erased the emotional toll on Jamal. The teenage boy found himself replaying the encounter in his dreams, waking in the middle of the night with sweaty palms haunted by the memory of Tennyson's sneer. Morgan, sensing her son's stress, took a few days off. She cancelled some of her official commitments and stayed home cooking his favorite meals and talking him through his nightmares. Yet a growing part of Jamal felt a stir of something else, a desire to speak out. He knew countless kids who'd faced similar or worse encounters without a mother in the White House to come to the rescue. He felt a moral weight pressing on him, urging him to turn this personal trauma into a catalyst for change. When local news stations asked for interviews, he hesitated. Morgan told him the choice was his. Ultimately, he decided to speak, if only to stand in solidarity with others who had no platform. So one brisk morning, Jamal and Morgan appeared on a local news show. Jamal wore a simple button-down shirt, still looking every bit the shy high school student. Morgan sat beside him, composed, yet visibly protective. Jamal, the host, asked, "What would you say to other teenagers who feel targeted or afraid?" Jamal paused, inhaling slowly. He recalled the fear that gripped him when Tennyson singled him out. "I'd tell them, never be ashamed of who you are. If you can record the encounter or get witnesses, and talk about it after, because if we don't talk, nothing changes." Morgan nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. The interview ended on a moving note that resonated across the city, a call for accountability, empathy, and understanding. Meanwhile, Tennyson sat in his small suburban house, watching the same interview. His face was twisted in outrage. He believed he had done nothing wrong. "I was just doing my job," he told himself. But as he flipped through news channels, showing bystander footage of him pushing Jamal against the fence, a knot of uneasy dread settled in his gut. He knew this was bigger than any other complaint filed against him. This time, the system might not protect him. At police headquarters, the atmosphere around Officer Tennyson's case was tense. Investigators from internal affairs pored over videos, witness statements, and Tennyson's track record. More than once, Tennyson had been accused of using excessive force or racially biased policing. Though he had evaded serious disciplinary action before, he'd been subject to repeated counseling sessions. This time, however, the avalanche of evidence was too large to ignore. Officer Karen Price testified, recounting the events of that evening with an honesty that surprised some of her colleagues. She described Tennyson's aggression, her own disagreement with his decision to detain Jamal, and the convenience store clerk's statement that Jamal had done nothing wrong. "We shouldn't have taken it that far," she admitted. "That kid was innocent." After her testimony, Price found herself ostracized by some at the precinct who viewed her as disloyal. Others, however, subtly expressed respect for her integrity. She returned to her patrol duties, uncertain of how her fellow officers would treat her. But she refused to lie. The truth, she believed, was the only way to rebuild trust with the community. Outside the precinct, protesters gathered daily. Groups held signs demanding Tennyson's firing. Others called for broader police reforms, chanting slogans like "Stop racial profiling" and "Justice for Jamal." Tempers occasionally flared between demonstrators and counter-protesters who supported Tennyson. It was the kind of media circus that city officials dreaded, but one they could no longer ignore. Morgan Harris attended a city council meeting accompanied by Jamal. Community leaders spoke passionately about the need for policy overhauls, body cameras, better training, stricter accountability. Morgan, as both a public servant and a concerned mother, delivered a measured yet stirring speech. "This isn't about vengeance," she said, voice resonating in the packed hall. "This is about ensuring every child, every citizen, can walk down a street without fear of being harassed or harmed because of the color of their skin." Jamal sat quietly beside her, but his presence was powerful, a reminder that the issue was personal, not abstract. As the mother and son left the meeting, multiple council members approached them, promising to fast-track discussions. Jamal felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this outpouring of public outrage could lead to something positive. Back at the White House, Morgan found support from many colleagues, though she kept her role in the incident carefully balanced. She didn't want to exploit her position for personal gain, yet she also wouldn't remain silent about injustice. The president privately commended her composure, and the administration made subtle moves to push local reforms. Morgan took it as a sign that real change might be on the horizon, though she remained cautious. Bureaucracy often moved at a snail's pace. Behind closed doors, Tennyson fumed. His hearing loomed. He faced possible termination, or worse, if criminal charges were filed. The district attorney's office was reviewing whether his stop of Jamal constituted unlawful detention. Tennyson's lawyer advised him to keep quiet, but Tennyson couldn't resist complaining to his few remaining allies. "This is a witch hunt," he'd rant. "I'm being punished because that kid's mother is powerful. It's political, not justice." But deep down, even Tennyson suspected the tide was turning. The days of escaping accountability through intimidation and half-truths were coming to an end. Through it all, life in the Harris household was a tangle of emotions. Morgan balanced her demanding White House duties with caring for Jamal, who struggled to process the event's psychological aftermath. At school, he became a hero to some, the kid who stood up to a racist cop. But that label made him uneasy. He just wanted to be a normal teenager, not a symbol for a national movement. Meanwhile, an unexpected twist unfolded. The convenience store clerk, a young man named Luis Rosales, stepped forward with a statement that he had witnessed Tennyson harassing other black teens in the neighborhood. Luis gave interviews describing several instances where Tennyson loitered outside the store, sometimes even following teens who didn't appear to be doing anything suspicious. The story added weight to the allegations of racial profiling, fueling public outrage. As the hearing date approached, Tennyson's reputation sank lower. Social media erupted with calls for his prosecution. The police union was split, with some members publicly distancing themselves from him. Under intense pressure, Tennyson lashed out at a local reporter who tried to film him leaving the precinct. The video of that altercation circulated online, painting him as even more volatile. But amid all the chaos, no one could have predicted the biggest twist. Days before Tennyson's disciplinary hearing, evidence surfaced that he had falsified records in previous stop-and-frisk incidents. Whistleblowers came forward, other officers tired of covering up for him. An internal memo showed Tennyson had lied about suspects' behaviors to justify his arrests. The scandal exploded in the media, overshadowing even the original incident with Jamal. At this point, Tennyson's lawyer realized the walls were closing in. Recommendations flew that Tennyson be dismissed from the force immediately. Some called for his entire record to be re-examined with possible charges for misuse of authority. Tennyson found himself alone, facing the full weight of a system that no longer wanted to protect him. In the Harris household, Morgan and Jamal watched the developments unfold on television. Neither of them took pleasure in Tennyson's downfall, but they recognized the necessity of justice. One evening, Jamal had trouble sleeping. He joined his mom at the kitchen table, where she was preparing notes for a speech about criminal justice reform. "Mom," he asked softly, "do you think he'll ever realize what he did was wrong?" Morgan set her pen down, giving her son a searching look. "I don't know," she said gently. "But whether he admits it or not, he's going to face the consequences. What matters now is making sure this leads to changes so that officers like him can't hurt anyone else." Jamal nodded, gazing at the scattered papers that represented policy's data on wrongful arrests and community proposals for better policing. He felt a swirl of hope and sadness. Part of him wanted to move on, but another part understood this was bigger than just one event in his life. It was about preventing future Jamals from going through the same ordeal. Morgan reached out and covered his hand with hers. "You know," she added, "your willingness to speak up helped a lot of people see the truth. That takes courage." Jamal smiled timidly, still trying to reconcile the attention with the quiet kid he'd always been. But maybe the world needed more quiet kids to speak out. Their voices, often overlooked, might just stir the biggest changes. The grey skies over Washington matched the mood that hung heavy in the air. Rain threatened to fall, but for now, the clouds held back like the city itself was holding its breath. Outside the police administrative building, a line of news vans formed a steel perimeter. Protesters filled the sidewalks, voices rising over the hum of camera crews. Some held signs that read, "Justice for Jamal." Others shouted chants about accountability and racial profiling. A smaller but vocal group stood behind barricades across the street, waving blue flags and "Support our officers" banners. The tension crackled in the narrow space between. Inside the building, the air was no less charged. The hearing room was utilitarian bland walls, fluorescent lights, and the distinct coldness of institutional judgment. At the center of it all sat Officer Philip Tennyson, dressed in a dark suit that still clung to the posture of someone who thought the uniform granted untouchable authority. His jaw was locked. His eyes were defiant. Across from him sat a panel of internal affairs officers, their expressions unreadable. To one side sat his attorney. On the other, the people his actions had impacted, Jamal Morgan, Officer Karen Price Luis Rosales, and several witnesses who had submitted statements or video footage. Jamal sat straight, hands in his lap, heart thudding loud enough for him to hear. He wasn't scared, at least not the way he'd been that night. But something deeper pulsed within him, a demand to be heard, to be seen not just as a victim, but as someone who had stood his ground. Morgan sat beside him, calm but fierce, like a storm in still water. She wore a tailored navy suit, and when her name was called to testify, she stood with the kind of command that silenced even the shuffling of notepads. "My son." She began, voice even was profiled, harassed and physically handled by an officer who never had probable cause. I arrived on the scene to find him being threatened with unlawful detainment, surrounded by cameras and terrified. Officer Tennyson didn't just fail to de-escalate, he escalated needlessly, and in doing so he endangered a child's life and betrayed the public trust. Next was Jamal. His voice shook at first, but quickly found steadiness. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was walking home after school. I had a bottle of water. He treated me like a criminal because of how I looked. I tried to stay calm, just like my mom taught me. But he wouldn't listen. He wouldn't even look at me like I was human." Murmurs stirred in the room, and even some panel members shifted uncomfortably. Officer Karen Price was next. She stepped forward slowly, scanning the room before speaking. "I was there," she said. "I didn't agree with what Phil did. I told him we had no cause. I even went inside the store and confirmed with the clerk that the kid hadn't stolen anything. But Phil didn't want to let it go. He pushed harder. And I should have spoken up sooner." There was a pause. Then Luis Rosales, the store clerk, testified. I'd seen that officer outside my store before. He liked to hover when black kids came in. That night, Jamal bought water and left like anyone else. There was no issue, none. The panel listened. They scribbled notes, whispered to each other. Then came Tennyson's turn. He rose, stiff jaw clenched. "I was doing my job," he said coldly. "I acted on a tip about a suspect matching his description. I didn't know he was the son of someone powerful. If I had, I would have handled it differently." A sharp intake of breath spread across the room. One panel member leaned forward. "So you're saying your approach changes based on who a person's parent is?" Tennyson tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. Then came the final blow. The panel introduced a series of internal memos and reports, evidence that Tennyson had falsified past incident records, lied about interactions, and repeatedly targeted minority youth under vague suspicions. Whistleblowers had come forward, fellow officers who had grown tired of covering for him. As each document was read aloud, the tension thickened. Tennyson's face flushed. His lawyer attempted to object, but the chair overruled. This hearing concerns not just this incident, but a pattern of conduct, he said firmly. Hours passed. Finally, the panel recessed to deliberate. When they returned, their decision was unanimous. Officer Philip Tennyson, the lead investigator, declared, "You are hereby terminated from the Metropolitan Police Department, effective immediately. Your actions have violated the standards of ethical policing and community trust. Furthermore, your conduct will be referred to the district attorney for review and possible criminal prosecution." For a moment, silence. Then Tennyson snapped. He slammed a fist on the table. "This is political," he roared. "I've been on the streets protecting this city for 20 years, and now I'm being punished for doing my job. You're making a mistake." Security moved in swiftly. He was escorted from the room, his protests echoing down the corridor. Cameras waited outside. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in shouts. The image of a disgraced officer being led away would be on every news channel before nightfall. Inside, Morgan placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. His eyes remained fixed on the empty chair where Tennyson had sat. "It's over," she said quietly. "Not for everyone," Jamal replied. "But maybe it's a start." They walked out into the daylight, past cameras and microphones and chaos. Reporters called out for comment. Morgan turned, offering one final composed statement. "We didn't come here for revenge," she said. "We came for accountability, and today we got it." The days after Officer Tennyson's public downfall brought a strange kind of quiet to the Harris home. The storm had passed, but the debris remained emotional, social, even political. Jamal was back to his routine, but nothing felt quite the same. He returned to school where classmates now looked at him with a mix of admiration and curiosity. Some treated him like a hero, others like a cautionary tale. Teachers asked if he was okay. Counselors offered sessions. Friends texted non-stop. But underneath it all, Jamal still felt the weight of what had happened, that chilling moment when his life was nearly derailed by a man with a badge and a prejudice. He didn't want to be famous. He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to walk down the street without fear. But the world had other plans. To help him cope, Morgan arranged private therapy sessions. Jamal, initially reluctant, eventually found solace in those quiet, judgment-free hours. He talked about the fear, the helplessness, the rage. And slowly, piece by piece, he began to rebuild his sense of safety. Morgan herself hadn't stopped moving. If anything, her resolve had sharpened. She returned to the White House with a renewed fire drafting legislation, consulting with lawmakers, and championing accountability from every podium she could find. Colleagues listened more attentively now. When you see a senior official's child being treated like a suspect, simply for walking down the street, the issue becomes personal even to the most aloof policy architects. She didn't exploit the event. She didn't need to. The facts were powerful enough. And then one day something unexpected happened. Jamal received a letter, not a text, not an email, but a handwritten letter delivered through the school office. It was from a boy in Kansas City. "Dear Jamal," it read, "I saw your video. I'm black too. Once I got stopped just for biking to school. They said I looked suspicious. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. But seeing you speak out made me realize I wasn't alone. Thank you." Jamal read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in his backpack like it was made of glass. That evening he told Morgan. She just smiled, pride glowing quietly in her eyes. "You see," she said, "this is why it mattered." In time, Jamal agreed to speak at a community event, a summit on police reform and youth empowerment held at the city's civic center. Though nervous, he prepared a short speech. When his moment came, he stood at the podium, hands trembling slightly, but voice steady. "I didn't ask for any of this," he told the crowd. "But if my story helps make it easier for the next kid, if it helps someone speak up or makes someone in power think twice, then I'm okay with that." The crowd responded with thunderous applause. Morgan stood nearby, tears in her eyes, reminded again that sometimes our children become our greatest teachers. The city took notice. Legislation moved faster. Committees met more frequently. Even officers within the precinct began talking openly about needing better training and accountability systems. The culture was beginning slowly, cautiously to shift. At home, the conversations were softer now. Morgan and Jamal spent more time cooking together, watching old sci-fi movies and talking about college. Jamal had his sights set on Howard University or Georgetown. He'd even been invited to join a youth advisory board on community police relations. One afternoon, as they sat on the front steps watching the sun dip below the Capitol dome, Jamal turned to his mom. "Do you think it'll really change anything?" Morgan exhaled, her hand resting gently over his. "Change is slow and painful, but every push matters. You mattered." Jamal nodded. "I just want to live in a city where someone like Tennyson doesn't get to decide what kind of person I am, just by looking at me." Morgan looked into her son's eyes, the same eyes she'd looked into the day he was born, full of promise, full of fight. "That's exactly the kind of city I'm working to build. And now so are you." That night they shared dinner at the table. No cameras, no calls, just a mother and son who had weathered a storm and come out stronger. And outside Washington, D.C. bustled as always, full of people, full of noise, full of possibility. But for once in the Harris home, there was peace. Not because the world had fixed itself, but because they had chosen to keep pushing for better and found the strength to keep going. In the end, Officer Tennyson faced the consequences of his actions, losing his badge and the shield that had once protected him. Jamal Harris, with the steadfast support of his mother, transformed a moment of terror into a call for justice, sparking changes in the city's policies and igniting conversations nationwide. Their story reminds us that courage can come from the most unexpected places, like a frightened teen standing up to a powerful system, or a devoted mother willing to challenge injustice at any cost. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps spread these messages of accountability and hope to more people, fueling a conversation that doesn't end here. Together, we can create communities where every individual, regardless of race or background, can feel safe and respected. Thank you for watching.